Okay, here I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the policies after removing Native Americans to the reservations, and then the other policies that led to a cultural genocide against the Native Americans. So you learned about the ghost dance, and then the reaction of the whites and the government to that with the massacre at Wounded Knee, and before that outlawing the dance completely. So that kind of gives you an idea that it wasn't just that we needed that the government wanted to move the Native Americans off the land. They were still in the United States and they still had to deal with them. And them practicing their own culture scared the whites, scared the United States government because they kept worrying that they would try to rise up in a rebellion against the United States. And so the next step was then to start trying to completely get rid of their culture. You saw that with banning their religious practice with the dance, the ghost dance. And then the next step in that was the boarding schools. So it was decided that if you could, as it says here, kill the Indian, save the man, if you can get rid of Native American culture, make them completely assimilate into white culture, then this will solve the problem of Native Americans. Because another unintended consequence that the government created with their reservation policy was Native Americans became very dependent on the government for their food and everything because they had removed Native Americans from their traditional lands so they could no longer support themselves with their traditional occupations. They couldn't hunt the buffalo, they couldn't grow the food they were used to because now they were on different land that did not support those actions. And so this was another way of the United States government trying to fix that problem, get the Native Americans to leave their reservations and just join white culture so they would no longer be dependent on the government. So when we talk about a form of cultural genocide, you may have heard the term genocide before, usually in the context of like the Holocaust or the African tribes in Rwanda. It refers usually to the systematic, organized killing of a group of people based on their race, their gender, their ethnicity. So, for instance, in the Holocaust, it was Jews, so it was their religious beliefs. This time, we're not talking about the actual physical murder of people. We're talking about the United States government trying to completely get rid of Native American culture. So when the Native Americans were sent to the boarding schools, they were not allowed to speak their native language. They were not allowed to dress in their traditional clothing. They were not allowed to practice their traditional religious beliefs or anything else related to their culture. This picture really illustrates that well of how they looked when they showed up and then when they were forced to become like whites, to dress like them, their hair has been cut, all of that. Um, the uh, excerpts we gave you to read really illustrate this as well. So you can tell in here they are trying to um, separate the tribes. So that talks about how they've been feeding, clothing, and having to care for them. And so to try to get rid of that, as I said before, they're going to try to make them assimilate into um, the white United States. And then right here, very illustrative, he says, so that they will lose his identity. They did not want them to see themselves as a separate Native American tribe. In this um, excerpt, um, a, a person with the boarding schools and that was working with the tribes was recalled how parents who had grown up in the boarding schools and then returned to the reservations um, were then bringing their own 8 or 9 year old children to them, trying to get them put in boarding schools, even though they hated the boarding schools. And the reason was because they had been taken away from their own families, they were never taught how to be parents themselves. They were not part of a family from the time they were, 7, 8 years old. And so they had no experience with that, and they didn't know how to take care of their own children. This was another way that these policies sought to end Native American culture, and um, this was another consequence of those policies, is that these parents just didn't even know how to take care of their own children and raise them in their own Native American tribe. These policies also led to Native American languages being lost or mostly lost because the children forgot the languages because they were punished if they spoke them. They learned English, and that's what they were forced to do. Um, so these are the policies. This is what we're talking about when we talk about a cultural genocide. The policy of the government trying to really just make the Native Americans assimilate into the white culture.